Welcome everybody to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network March webinar. My name is Xiaohan Smith. I will be your moderator today, and we will be hearing the story and rehabilitation of the book tower. Before I turn it over to our speaker, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, also put them into the Q&A box. And the Q&A box should be located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see it, please wiggle your mouse. And the chat box will be used to share resources or links discussed during the webinar. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We advocate for Michigan's historic places to contribute to our economic vitality, sense of place, and connection to the past. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. If you are not a member yet, please consider joining us at mhpn.org. Our webinars are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker. Today we'll be hearing from Brian Rebane. He is a principal of the Kraemer Design Group. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Xiaohan. Can everybody hear me okay? And Xiaohan, can you see my first title slide? Great.
Yes,
just want to confirm. Great. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Xiaohan said, my name is Brian Rebane, and I'm a principal at Kraemer Design Group. We are an architecture, interior design, and historic consulting firm located in Detroit. And I'm really looking forward to presenting the story of the rehabilitation of the book tower for you today. KDG has been working in various capacities with various clients on this building for over 20 years. And I have personally been working on the redevelopment of this building for about 18 years. So it's very close to my heart. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly thank MHPN for organizing the webinar. And also special thanks to my colleague at KDG, Cassandra Talley, for leading the effort in preparing this presentation. We worked pretty closely as we put it together. So we've got lots to cover, though. So let's jump in. So the book building and tower were planned and developed by the Book family, the Book brothers, which included brothers J. Burgess Jr., Herbert Book, and Frank Book. The Book brothers inherited a vast amount of wealth from their maternal grandfather, Francis Palms, who was once the largest landowner in Michigan, and as a result were members of one of Detroit's most prominent real estate families in the early decades of the 20th century. The brothers grew up in the former Cadillac Hotel, which was located on the site of what would become the Book Cadillac Hotel at Michigan Avenue and Washington Boulevard. The Cadillac Hotel at the time was was downtown's finest hotels, and the Book brothers eventually purchased the building in 1918 as part of their growing downtown real estate portfolio, but then later demolished it to build the even grander Book Cadillac in 1924. The Book brothers would eventually become the primary real estate developer of Washington Boulevard during its heydays in the 1920s. They were inspired by the City Beautiful movement, which was a progressive reform philosophy of those who sought to counteract common problems in American cities, such as overcrowding. And the supporters of that movement advocated that the beautification of American cities would promote social order, progressive ideals, civic pride. And Washington Boulevard was kind of a model for that for the Book brothers, with its park-like atmosphere, the greenery running down the median in the middle, fountains. It's very much a product of that movement and of the vision of the book towers. Here it is in this image. You can see it shown with the book building being constructed in the background and the Cadillac Hotel in the foreground at right. So here's an early news clipping image of the book building in its original form. It was designed in the Italian Renaissance style by architect Louis Kamper. It was built by Walbridge Aldinger Company. And the building was began construction in 1916 and was completed in 1917. As you can see here, it was originally constructed mid-block, and the building was 7 window bays wide and 13 stories tall. But shortly after they designed the original building, they decided to add 3 additional bays to the south in 1918. The addition was intended to match the detail of the original building. As you can see, it was likely constructed simultaneously as the building was going up. And so the materials, the detailing, everything, it matches the building, the original building very, very closely. But you can see that there is a seam there at the former southern corner of the building. There is a line of limestone coins that project out, and you can see those mirrored on the new addition as well. So you can kind of see where that addition occurred. You can still see today, of course. And with the design of the book building and its opening, thus began Louis Kamper and the Book brothers' long professional relationship, as Kamper would go on to design the rest of the Book brothers' developments on Washington Boulevard. This included, of course, the Book Cadillac Hotel, as noted before, but it also included the Washington Boulevard building, the Industrial Bank building, which is now called the Louis Kamper building, and also the Book Tower extension addition that occurred in 1928. Going back to the initial plan, the original plan of the book building in its first edition in 1918, you can see here in lighter pink at middle is the original 7 bays of the building. And then the darker pink are the 3 additional bays that were added. The building itself from the beginning had a large central main lobby that you can hopefully see here, my cursor circling. There were 2 banks of elevators, a bank of 4 elevators to the south and a bank of 2 elevators here. There were all sorts of retail shops of different sizes and shapes, some of which opened directly to Washington Boulevard and some of which opened only to the interior lobby. And at the middle of this, these 8 columns right here was the original open atrium-like rotunda, as it was called. The rotunda soared up 3 stories to the roof of the building. There's a light well here that it capped out at. And it was really the centerpiece of this lobby, as we'll see in subsequent slides here. Just for a point of reference, these 4 elevators stretched up to the top of the building, the 13th floor. And then these 2 elevators here only serviced the 3 stories that surrounded the rotunda. Here's a picture of the rotunda. You can see what a grand space it was at the time. When it was completed in 1917 and opened, it contained some prominent retail spaces, upscale stores, which was really kind of the goal of Washington Boulevard, to be kind of the fashion street in downtown Detroit. And the lobby really aspired to that. You can see the finishes here, Botticino marble columns and balustrades imported from Italy. You can see these frescoes, these bas-relief frescoes painted on the ceilings all around the rotunda. And you can also see some of the original bronze work around the elevator doors, which were quite elaborate. This image was a really great resource for us because, as you'll learn, this rotunda was subsequently taken apart, and this is really the only clear photo from those early days showing a lot of the detail. About 10 years later, the demand for office space in Detroit was very strong, and the Book brothers were still very interested in growing their Washington Boulevard presence. And so they decided to build another addition really to the book building called the Book Tower. This is, of course, the tower that we all know. Also designed by Louis Kamper in 1926. It was 38 stories tall, and at that time was briefly the tallest building in Detroit until the Penobscot building was completed a couple years later. The photograph on the left, you can see the tower under construction, the steel framing, and then the photo on the right is taken shortly after it was completed. And there were news articles at the time claiming that you could see it from 25 miles away. So it was really a very prominent new addition to the Detroit skyline. But not to be outdone by the Penobscot, the Book brothers planned an even larger addition to the book building. This was a proposed 81-story behemoth. It was designed to be the tallest and largest building in the world at the time, if you can imagine that. This was before the Empire State Building. And the addition was designed to be 873 feet tall. It would have housed over 1.7 million square feet of interior space. But, you know, happening in the late 1920s, you can imagine the plan was scuttled by the financial challenges brought on by the Great Depression and never realized. In its place, the Book brothers did build a small 2-story steel and wood frame building, which you'll see later in the presentation. But this large building was never realized, unfortunately. This slide starts to look at some of the early occupants of the building, which is always an interesting window into the character of buildings like this. So the early occupants included a mix of retail and professional services. You can see on this brochure that there was a furrier, the Page and Shaw candy shop. There were numerous men's and women's tailors, millineries. There was the Cunard cruise line travel agent was there. There were florists and optometrists. Household goods were sold, all sorts of shops and services. So it was really kind of, as opposed to some buildings which were maybe focused on one type of retail or office, this was really servicing all spaces in retail outlets. So and some of those early tenants still, remnants of them still existed in the building up until very recently. You can see this storefront on the second floor had a small little graphic in the corner for the Virginia Farrell Salon, and it's great to just see some of those businesses. This one we know goes back as far as 1952 in the building. It's just nice to see some of those remnants to remind us of what was once there. And this is a great one. So this was there were not a lot of images from those early retailers, but the Page and Shaw candy shop. There's this great photo, and you can see here it's an undated photo, but you can see the kind of high quality of retail offerings that the building was really aspiring to. They decorated their stores very elaborately. They had these kind of exotic Moorish paintings and frescoes on the wall. You can see the pyramids and such, and palm trees. And the Page and Shaw was an upscale candy shop that had stores in several major North American cities at the time. It was called the Candy of Excellence was their slogan. So again, even the candy shop was a very upscale type store and experience. Here is a photo from an unknown retailer, but again, just kind of goes to show the opulence in these stores. I mean, the quality of the millwork and detailing. You can see there's some very kind of special wall coverings here with these fanciful patterns. And so again, it was just another example of the really high quality retail offerings that were in the building. This one kind of goes in a totally different direction. Here are a couple images from what was once the Gale Research Company. It was a long-term tenant in the building. It occupied floors 7, floors 14, among others. And it was founded in 1954. It was a publisher of educational and academic research publications. It still exists today. I think it's headquartered in Farmington Hills somewhere. But it specializes now in, of course, online sources and content, kind of the same place in the market. So, but it's one example, I think, why we included it, of a professional services business that was in the building on the upper floors in particular. There was a whole range of different types of professional service groups, but and in fact, there were several law firms on the Washington Boulevard wing of the building looking over the boulevard. But this is just a great one because these two photos, you can see the photo in the upper left taken in 1983. where they're, I don't know what they're presenting there. There's some kind of photo session. And then again in 2015 on the lower photo, you can see the same wall paneling and the globe light fixtures. Possibly most notably, in the 1960s and 1970s, the area around the book building and tower was known as Airline Row due to the concentration of airline ticket counters. These were kind of satellite locations for the ticket counters at the airport when travelers needed to purchase actual physical tickets instead of going all the way out to Romulus. They could go right downtown and buy their business or pleasure travel all in one location. And so you can see all the different airline signs on the building at the time. American Airlines was the corner tenant and one of the largest, most prominent of the Airline Row tenants in the building. You can even see here that they renovated the storefront and got rid of the original limestone and replaced with a more modern granite veneer, which existed all the way up until the most recent renovation. And in all likelihood, they were also probably the company that infilled the rotunda at the time to create more office space. Hard to believe that little square made much of an impact in a building this large, but it's presumed to be around this time that was infilled. But nonetheless, it's pretty interesting to see all of these ticket counters lined up. You can see that this is that 2-story building that the Book Brothers built in place of that 81-story building. But you can see all the names lined up here. Northwest Airlines, Lufthansa, United, Delta, everybody's favorite Pan Am, and they were all here, ready to do business. So, and then here, just kind of one last slide on the interior for now. This is the book building directory. Always an interesting feature in a building, especially a vacant one, when you can see the tenants. You see on the right hand side, the original directory was a freestanding, very elaborate construction. It was kept right at the entrance off of Washington Boulevard, kind of near the building elevators. You can kind of see there's not a ton of tenants at the time, but it was the original directory, and sadly has been lost. Today, the book building directory is located on this plaque, which is inside the Grand River entrance near the tower elevator bank. And it shows all of the final tenants of the building. It's still there today. So it's kind of interesting to go check it out. A new digital screen is actually planned to go in the framework of this directory, and there will be a new interactive directory showing all the tenants of the building once that's complete. And just on a personal note, before we get into the kind of rehab work, Kraemer Design Group's office was right across the street from the Grand River entrance, and so this was a common sight for us to walk over there at lunchtime, hop in, go to Zeff's Coney Island. Was one of the last restaurant tenants in the building. And even though it was largely vacant on the upper floors, in 2008, 2009, right before it closed, the lobby was still somewhat vibrant. There were retailers in there, and it was one of the few kind of building atriums, lobbies that was still had an active presence downtown. So rehabilitating an icon. So this gets into this next section, really kind of the exterior work on the building. In 2015, Bedrock Detroit purchased Book Tower. At that time, the building had been closed and vacant since its last tenant left in 2009, which was Bookies, which was a restaurant and bar here located at the corner. In that time frame, a few real estate developers had attempted to pull together some redevelopment plans, but unfortunately, the enormity of the building at nearly 500,000 square feet was just too much for most investors to take a risk on during that economic time period. And so as a result, ownership changed hands a few times between, call it 2006 and 2015. But at that point, Bedrock saw an opportunity, purchased the building, and ultimately in collaboration with ODA Architects, Bureau Happold Engineers, Method Hospitality, Chrisman, and the Brinker Group, the building was rehabilitated into 229 apartments, 117 hotel suites, all sorts of bars and restaurants that are open again in the building, and 3 floors of commercial space again at the surrounding that rotunda atrium lobby. And KDG was the historic architect and code consultant for the project. So starting in 2016, Bedrock went straight to work after purchasing the tower to stabilize the exterior. When the renovations began, the building was very discolored from decades of dirt and soot accumulation, especially noticed at the terracotta, where it seems to just kind of static cling to that glazed terracotta. And in some cases, some people actually miss this look. It was long remembered, this picture on the right, as really kind of a standout on the west side of downtown. But other things were bad too. It wasn't just dirt. You can see on the left-hand side, there were some window mullions, some sculptural stone window mullions on the third floor, and those had just been deteriorated over time. There's very little detail left at the time, and so a lot of work had to be done to restore the facade. Walker Restoration prepared the facade restoration drawings, and Ram Construction were the ones who did the work. So here's some great progress photos taken in 2017 of the masonry cleaning in progress. You can see on the 13th floor of the tower, the sculptural terracotta there, and the kind of before after of the clean terracotta with the dirty. It's just one of the great photos showing progress of this building. And you can even see, if you look kind of around the terracotta, some of the cleaned brick areas where just the darkened, dirty brick had been cleaned as well. So it's quite a transformation. And then on the right-hand side, you see the kind of the similar effect up at the 25th floor, where the forward-facing facade has been cleaned and the side-facing facade is still dirty. The windows were also a major consideration. They were generally in very poor condition. There were three primary types of steel windows on the building and tower. The building had pairs of casement windows on the Washington Boulevard facade, and the alley facade were double hung wired glass fire-rated glazing, which was pretty common on alley facades. And then the tower had a hollow metal double hung window. And you can see, especially in the upper right, the kind of damage that was occurring, and is often common in these types of windows, where, over time, water starts to infiltrate. It starts to pool at the bottom. This happens to be a mullion between two windows. Pools at the bottom of that hollow metal profile, starts to corrode from inside. And then as soon as freezing happens, it starts to burst that metal. And at that point, it's just gone. It's beyond repair. And you can also see that some windows were already replaced. The lower left, those arched windows at the top of the building, which is always where the most severe deterioration occurs first. Those were replaced with a non-compliant window. And so a full survey had to be done to really understand the condition and what could be done with it. And in the end, it was determined, just due to the sheer number and state of disrepair, that all the windows had to be replaced. This amounted to a total of almost 2,500 new aluminum historic replica windows. It was a $5.5 million project just to do the windows alone. And we worked very closely with the State Historic Office, as well as the City of Detroit Historic District Commission, to make sure that we got the replication exactly right. And there's a great view of it here on the lower left, of the new aluminum window on the left and the original window on the right. And you can see that not only does the size and shape match exactly, but even some of the detail profiles are very closely replicated in this. And so all of the windows look exactly as they did 100 years ago when the building was built. Quaker Windows fabricated the window units, and Blackberry Windows did all the installation. So now we get to a pretty interesting part of the building rehab, the cornice replacement. So one of the many standout details of Book Tower is the cornice running along the top of the original building. Sitting at the 13th floor, this was really one of the few remaining intact original cornices downtown. So many had been removed due to deterioration and life safety hazards. But this one remained, and it's pretty spectacular one, as you can see in this image. The cornice was built entirely of decorative glazed terracotta components, which were grouted solid around steel trusswork. That top coping edge projects out about 6 to 7 feet from the building facade. So it's quite a deep cornice. And the underside of each bay of the cornice was, you can see, characterized by those darker panels, which were actually a kind of a deep royal blue glazed terracotta with a light centered in the middle of it. That's that little circular figure you see right there. But of course, the most kind of prominent feature are the brackets, and you have these large 12-foot tall caryatids that sort of figuratively held up the cornice, and they were at every structural bay, alternating with some smaller decorative brackets that were in the mid bays between the windows. But as you got close to these features, you started to see some real problems. Not only was there significant spalling of the terracotta, but even the caryatids themselves, you can see the wooden legs, which I'm part of me wonders if those were original, the feat of suspending terracotta like that just seems kind of impossible. But they were not in the condition that they seem from 13 stories below. And in reality, this deterioration had created some life safety hazards from the threat of falling pieces of terracotta. But that wasn't even the worst of it. So when Bedrock and their contractors started to dig into the roof flashing up above, they found an even more significant problem. And this is, I'm not sure how well this is showing up on screen, but essentially the underlying steel trusses that projected out from the building facade, and this is what the caryatids kind of wrapped around. The top chord of that truss right up here was an upturned steel I-beam, which was turned on its side. And at that point, the steel I-beam essentially served to just capture and pool water at the point of connection where the top chord of the truss connected to the structure of the building. You can see this image here where that corrosion is occurring, effectively weakening the most critical connection point for this whole cornice. If that connection goes, this whole truss and all the terracotta with it falls forward. So not only was there this danger of individual fragments of terracotta spalling and falling off, but you had a real threat of, in time, this whole cornice coming down altogether, which was a really kind of scary thing, and kind of a reminder that the notion of building it like they used to wasn't always a good thing. So in comes the replacement, and after studying various options, we looked at replacing the terracotta pieces, repairing the trusses. All of that was just too difficult and frankly even dangerous to stage and complete. It was determined that the safest and best solution was to completely remove the cornice, all the steel, rebuild the steel frame, and all the decorative elements around it. And so castings of the original terracotta components were made so that we could perfectly replicate all of the profiles of the terracotta. And those molds were then turned into molds for new fiberglass pieces, which you can see here. These were some of the mock-ups that were done. And just for a sense of scale, I mean, that caryatid up front is, like I said, probably about 12 feet tall. You can see that wooden pallet next to it, which is about 4 feet tall. So that really puts it into perspective how giant these things are and how heavy they are. And so making them out of fiberglass as a replacement material really helped, because it meant that the steel supports wouldn't be as strained with all that weight on them. And because they were a single piece, it also meant that there were many, many fewer joints for water to infiltrate and create even more damage down the road. So this was a big job. Glassline were the fabricators of these components. They've done many of the cornice replications around downtown. This is probably their most special one. And you can see the result is just as stunning as the original. Includes all the original caryatid forms, the brackets in between, the blue accent panels, the LED lighting on the underside. Certain times you can see those lit up at night. And when I talk about this project, people are routinely surprised to hear that this cornice was not original, because it's just so perfectly replicated. Moving on to a couple other smaller details, but still significant. And there were so many interesting parts to this project. It's hard to kind of skip over some of these. So here I'm going back to this third story window mullion. And you can see on the upper left the level of deterioration. I mean, the figures that were sculpted into those marble columns are still kind of there, but you can't really see them. They've kind of washed away any real detail. And Bedrock didn't want to leave these there, not only because they were kind of rough condition, but just they're going to continue to deteriorate. And so the decision was made to go for broke and replace them all. You can see on the lower left, there were clay molds or clay templates made of the columns. These templates were made using the existing columns for scale and general composition. But then they also referred to historic precedent, old Louis Kamper building sculptors at the time, to understand the types of figures that would have been used. And with that, with artisans, they crafted these clay models, which were then scanned, digitally scanned, and automated CNC 3D routers were then kind of roughly carved the columns, after which artisans came in and hand carved the rest of the detail. And you can see on the right-hand side, the final product there, these marble columns, which are now a more weather-resistant version of marble, are just really beautiful features of the facade. So the next time you're walking by, be sure to look up. And this effort was led by Ram Construction. They kind of managed this aspect of the project. Another great aspect is the storefront replacement. So the original storefronts on the building had largely been replaced with modern aluminum frames, and the decorative detail at the transom had been mostly removed and covered over with these fabric awnings. Good news is that a few examples of those cast iron details remained under those awnings. And in addition to original photos and the original Kamper drawings, we were able to work with Allen Metals and Universal Glass to reconstruct each storefront in pretty exacting detail to its original form. And you can see on the right there those little pediments over the doors that have all sorts of great cast iron detailing around them. And it really is an incredible impact on the street when you walk by. And then one last exterior item. This was another big one. So an activated roof deck and other miscellaneous roof penthouses that were needed for the building. Bedrock really wanted to create a rooftop experience, and there is one for both the residents of the building as well as the general public. But in addition to that, there's the kind of common challenge of having to discreetly house mechanical systems, HVAC equipment, which is always big and bulky, and there's never a good place to put it, especially when it has to go outside. And so to ensure that the design met the Secretary of Interior standards, we worked with ODA to develop the sightline renderings, which mocked up the scale and massing of the penthouses, and then we were able to navigate around the model from street level to see how visible they actually were and modify those designs based on that visibility to get the right balance of providing the necessary amenities up there, but also concealing them generally from view. Some typical rules of thumb were followed, using existing penthouses and the heights of them, these two most prominently as kind of a guideline for the new penthouses. But then also holding things back from the parapet to make sure that they're not readily visible from the street below. And when you see the final product, they're invisible. And so, everyone did a great job ensuring that, at least from the primary street views of the building, you just don't see those penthouses. And when you do see them, they tend to be on the backside of the building. And again, following kind of the scale, massing, and materiality of those original penthouses and on the structure. And you can go up there today, by the way, and if you can get a reservation and have a drink and look over pretty spectacular views of downtown. And I actually lied. There is one more exterior detail that has to be addressed because everybody asks about the fire escape. Is it real? And yes, it is actually real. Louis Kamper designed some beautiful buildings, but I'll be honest, his life safety and egress plans were never that great. You can see on, I shouldn't say never, but the couple buildings I've worked on, both of them have the same situation. Long dead end corridors with an internal stair and a fire escape right across the hall from each other. So not really the ideal, picture perfect ideal of life safety in the modern era, but it's what the building's got. And the fire escape, not only was it a historic feature of the building that had to be maintained for design compliance, but it is actually a functional life safety component. And so even though this stair is pressurized and extra fire rated all the way down to grade, if for some reason it's unusable, people can get out and climb down the fire escape. But it's also kind of fascinating to look at. And the last time I was in the building, you can still see peregrine falcons hanging out on top of it. So that's a pretty cool thing too. So moving to the interior, so rebuilding the rotunda. The central lobby space, as I said, was once known as the rotunda and is again known as the rotunda. It had been infilled for additional office space. And this happened decades before Bedrock purchased the building. But one of their initial and primary goals in the rehab was to reconstruct the rotunda in as close a detail as possible. So the next few slides are gonna talk about that. So here's where the existing conditions. You can see on the left-hand photo, this is taken on the first floor. That was the opening, looking up into the rotunda space, and you can see it's been floored over, ceilinged over. You can see on the right-hand side, this is taken from approximately the same place on the floor plate, just one story up, and you can see interior storefront has been added there. The stone balustrades, of course, have been removed, and the stone fascia underneath the balustrades where the floor is infilled was damaged as well by the attachment of the new floor. So very little remained. You can see some of those decorative plaster ceiling tiles. Some of them had been retained and painted over time, but many others were just in bad condition and had been covered over. This is a floor plan showing the second floor, and you can see here where these partitions were built in. This is actually the floor area where the rotunda was filled in, and you can see it had just been taken over by this office space. But then here was the plan to kind of rebuild that original lobby rotunda. So in addition to removing this opening in the floor that had been filled in, we also had to recreate this original historic storefront to create the circulation pattern around the rotunda. And then there was also a double high space right as you entered the building off of Washington Boulevard. And so that was going to be recreated as well. The kind of yellow outline here is the outline area of the original historic corridor that was being reconstructed as part of the work. And here you can see some finished photos. So the infilled concrete slabs were cut away. A new replica balustrade was carved from the same solid marble used originally, so it matched perfectly, really, when you see it in person. Quarried from Italy, it was done by Wolverine Stone. The new balustrade design was adapted very closely from the original design, using historic photos and the original drawings for reference. But they were designed at code compliant height because the original ones were not tall enough. And also the balusters were too far apart. And so those had to be, even though they're the same shape as the original, they had to be placed more closely together in order to resist, fall protection, et cetera. But the other thing to note is just, all of these panels that were on the interior where the floor was attached. I mean, these had all been removed, and some of the columns still remained, and you can see those in the existing photos, but all of this stonework had to be reconstructed, and it was just done so. And really, really incredible detail and seamless with the old and the new. Here's a great view from the second floor of the rotunda looking across, and that's almost everything you see in the foreground here is new stone. A couple details from the rotunda. So these are that small bank of two elevators. There is one elevator front remaining on the second floor. It's still in great condition. And this is kind of again a hint and a reminder of the level of quality and luxury they were really trying to go for in this building. The surround features a graphic that is made from inlaid stone. It has a couple names. There's called opus sectile and pietra dura, which were essentially a technique of taking polished stone and inlaying it smooth, but using the different stone colors and textures to create images. And so you can see there's this kind of urn on a pedestal, various sort of floral and foliage forms here. There's some kind of griffin type winged horses up here. And this existed on those elevator fronts all the way through the rotunda. Also a great reminder of what the original elevator doors looked like, with this kind of decorative bar design. And as you'll see in the next photo, on the main bank of elevators, that had been replaced sometime later in the building's history. Still a pretty great elevator front, all of which were in pretty decent condition and were restored, polished up and restored. You can see the one on the left was the existing condition, and the one on the right is taken in 2022 after they'd been cleaned up. And then here are the elevator fronts and the towers. Again, lots of great detail. The two photos on the left show the elevator doors down at the first floor. These were cleaned and restored. They really are as incredible as they look in these photos. You can see all the inlay details that were there. But even the upper elevator doors had this great kind of pressed floral panel in it in the original doors. And unfortunately, with new elevator doors, you can't have that kind of relief. But the painters were actually able to create a stencil, a multicolored stencil, and they were able to replicate that graphic on those upper elevator doors, which was it turned out really great. And then now we're getting to kind of the showpiece of the project. So this is the Kepler glass dome as it existed when Bedrock bought the building, shown on the left there, that kind of centered under the dome photo. You can see that there's a lot of damage. There's missing glass pieces, missing panels, and the original transverse arch panels that extended below the main kind of rectangular frame had been removed, who knows when in the past. You can see in the upper right what the original dome looked like. This was a very good image of it and helped immensely in reconstructing the design of the dome. But you can just see what condition it was in that lower right-hand photo. But there's some hints. I mean, the pipes you see running there, that's just heating, kind of radiant piping. But you can see right along here, there's a bunch of light bulbs. And if you look up into this dark space here, there were also more light bulbs. And so this glow that was occurring was a very deliberate one and something that everyone was very excited to recreate with the new. Little history on Kepler Glass. So the Kepler Glass Construction Company was founded in 1912 by Frederick Kepler. He'd previously practiced architecture, worked for the Luxor Prism Glass Company, which is the little square prism glass you see over storefront everywhere in old buildings. They were based in New York, and they built and installed what they called their crystal ceilings all over the world. The two photos above show two different crystal ceilings installation. The one on the left is very similar to the book building. We don't know where it's actually from. And the one on the right, though, was taken from the Chamber of Commerce building in Rochester, New York, and you can see a lot of similar details in that construction. And here are photos of it now. The image on the left is just an absolutely fantastic, and it's what you want to do as soon as you walk in that building. Just look straight up, because this is the view that you can just stare at till you go dizzy. But it really is the crowning masterpiece of the rotunda. The restored dome is now one of the very few remaining crystal ceilings in the world. It's composed of 7,000 amber and clear glass pieces set within a bronze grid assembly. You can kind of see that on the upper right, especially. Though that grid assembly is then formed into larger panels, which are set into a master structural frame, and you can see that on the both on the right and left, kind of those thicker bars of metal there. The jewel pieces, the actual glass itself, you can see is quite a bit of three dimension to it. They were cast glass pieces. We had a lot of existing ones to work with, but all of the transverse arch glass is brand new, and the design of that was taken from the precedent in the dome. And we had a glass company custom fabricate these pieces for the reconstruction. But also, as I talked about, the lighting was very important. And in my opinion, it was actually one of the most complex and easiest to get wrong parts of this entire project. It involved multiple mock-ups with 20 to 30 people staring at it for 2 hours at a time, all to get the correct location, color, and controls to properly illuminate the top of the rotunda. The biggest surprise in the restoration of the dome was the fact that the glass pieces were mostly clear. They'd been covered with so much grime over the years that it was hard to tell that originally. And when they were first cleaned up, you realized how clear those panels were, and you can really see that in the right hand image, which was one of the mock-ups that were done. And so what that meant, though, is that the lighting and shadows and the structure really shined through. And if you go back and look at that couple slides ago, you can see the shadows actually shining through. That was the steel framework. You don't realize that when you first see the image, but that's exactly what's happening here with all the steel framework. And so they had to be very, very careful. The first mock-ups were just not right. They had tons of hot spots with the bulbs shining through, and it really kind of required a whole repositioning of the design intent. And so the goal was to really, conceal the bulbs, conceal shadows, The whole interior was painted a bright color so that it reflected a lot of light. And the goal was to create as even a light as possible across the dome. Bureau Happold was the lighting designer. They did a fantastic job with it. And again, all of us, it was an all hands on deck kind of collaboration to make sure we got it right. And it's, I think, the most successful part of this project. And here's just some great final photos. Again, you can really see the texture at the very top of the dome on the right-hand photo. Those kind of oval glass, I mean, they're huge. They weigh probably 5 to 10 pounds each. They're these big, thick pieces of glass. And they're just incredible how they play with the light when you see it in person. So getting to some other aspects of the rotunda, here are the decorative plaster ceilings. So you can see the condition that some of them were in, the really bad ones. But nonetheless, enough remained that Russell Plaster Company was able to get molds and reconstruct and infill and recreate those panels, those ceiling panels throughout the lobby and rotunda space. You can see one in progress on the right. They took several layers of paint to get the right texture and color in them. Again, another real success of this project. And here's some final photos of a few different areas, just showing some of the detail and paint quality of painting. These are always fun. So both the building and the tower had letterbox on the first floor, one at each of the main elevator banks. The mail chutes, as I'm sure everyone's familiar with, served these boxes on all the floors so that people could take care of their daily business correspondence just by walking to the lobby and dropping a letter down, as opposed to having to go all the way down to the first floor or the mailroom or something. But these are always great pieces within the lobby of any historic building, and these were both restored as part of the work. And then, of course, the clock. The clock is a great showpiece. As soon as you walk in the Washington Boulevard door, it greets you. It was the master clock that was used to regulate all the clocks in the building at the time when they were all connected together. And it's symbolically represents the flight of time. You can see the cherubs kind of holding up the clock there. It has a Walker Brothers and Haviland timing system in it. Here's a fantastic photo of the interior pre-rehab. While the lobby was relatively well occupied, the upper floors have been vacant for many decades, and it shows here. I mean, this is really looks like a building that had been empty for 20, 30, 40 years, as opposed to one that was, less than a decade. A lot of water damage. You can see the moss growing, and yeah, pretty terrible condition, although not uncommon for buildings that have been vacant for this long. And here's the new. There's two types of residential units. So you have the kind of regular apartments, long-term lease apartments. Those are designed by ODA, and that's on the left. And then on the right, you have the Roost hotel rooms. These are kind of larger hotel suites with bedrooms. Think of it as like an Airbnb style hotel, but they're fully furnished. They're intended for short-term stays, and those were designed and furnished by Morris Adjemi Architects out of New York for Roost. And then here's a couple images of the amenity areas for the residents. These were, well, the one on the upper left is the study, which is found on the second floor. And the one on the right is actually up on the 14th floor. And you can't see it in this image, but it has a small residents-only balcony off to the right. But these are just intended for, you can kind of book them for parties. The study on the upper left is a co-working space, and I'm told is routinely packed during the workday as a flexible working space. And then the last interior space I want to talk about, the 13th floor event space. You can see here on the plan on the right. So this is the 3-bay addition that was built in 1918. And Kamper did something different at the very top of it. So on the top floor, he created what was called an auditorium in the drawings. And it's a departure from the rest of the building in that it eliminated the central column line. And so you had this wide open space with large trusses spanning over the top that would have been used for some kind of assembly purposes, lectures, whatever the case might be. And it was always left that way. When we got into the building, the space was kind of oddly filled with chairs from like the 1960s and 70s, kind of gathered in different locations. And then it also had a suspended ceiling dropped. I mean, you can see it's even below the window head. So a very low ceiling that probably cut the space ceiling height in half. But when Bedrock, ODA, and Roost got involved, they saw the opportunity for something special, an event space up there. But the problem was it had the windows are actually quite small, and it didn't allow a lot of natural light into the space. And so the concept was to actually remove the solid roofing above, use the truss work, and build an atrium style skylight on top. And in addition to letting in lots of light, I mean, it's a very successful space. You actually get these really great views up to the tower, which is pretty cool to kind of look up and see that, especially at night. So it's a great surprise at the top of the building, in a building that's full of surprises. And that is my presentation. So happy to answer any questions. I have not been looking at the chat, but we can open that up now and see what folks are asking about.
Thank you, Brian, for this wonderful presentation. And we do have a lot of questions. And Cassandra is here, and feel free to jump up and be on screen and answer questions. Hi, Cassandra.
Hello. I answered a few of them, but I figure quite a few of these Brian will want to weigh in on. So
yeah, so I will just start reading the questions to you guys. Okay, so I believe a lot of people have noticed the glass dome is magnificent. And was having it covered over actually something that contributed to its conservation until it could be uncovered?
I would say yes. I think it's so often in these old buildings when things were kind of taken apart or modernized, I guess is maybe the right word to use. They did as little work as possible. They kind of did what they needed to do to achieve the desired effect. And so because the very top of the dome was kind of tucked up above the roof structure, they didn't really need to spend the money or time to take it apart. And so, yeah, they left it up there. They put a ceiling under it, a suspended ceiling. And Maureen Kraemer, who founded Kraemer Design Group, she tells a story about how she went up there whenever it was with the property manager at the time. We were doing some miscellaneous work, and they kind of poked the ceiling tile up to see what was up there, and it was all just there, just like it looked in the photos. And so it absolutely led to its preservation, because if all that had been removed, I think it would have been a much more monumental challenge to get that dome rebuilt, because there was so much of that glass could be used as a template for the pieces that were being reconstructed. And it's also worth noting, by the way, the other side of that dome is there's call it a functional skylight on top of it. The actual weatherproof skylight sits a few feet above it. That, of course, also had been leaking over time because it was old and in bad shape. And somewhere along the line, someone just built a simple plywood shed over it with roofing on it, and that added even more protection to the dome. So certainly covering it over helped, as opposed to removing it.
Okay, next question. How did Kraemer Design Group come to be involved in this building for like 20 years?
So it was, like I said, we were across the street. And if you actually look at this image on the screen, our office was the little red brick building for a long time. When I started working at KDG, right in front of it. And, like I said, we were frequently in the building. We had a relationship with the owner at the time, Susan Lambrecht. And we just kind of got involved. And there was some minor office work that needed to be done, and which is what led, that story about Maureen going into the building. But as people got interested, there was a developer from New York named Ricardo who was going to turn it into condos in 2006. He hired us to get involved in that plan, which we dove into. That's when I first started working on the building. That one kind of fell through. He sold the building. Another developer came in and we had a relationship with and had seen our previous work. And so they said, hey, why don't you look at this other plan? And then honestly, two more developers got involved along the way. And but this is all before Bedrock bought it, and looking at, different tweaks on that kind of standard formula of mixed use residential with some retail down at the ground floor. And, once Bedrock purchased the building, we had already had a long relationship with them and had done a lot of projects with them. And so we were a natural fit for the historic consulting and code consulting services once they did their side of it. So, it was an ongoing involvement that kind of took a lot of different forms over the years.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Were the old retail remnants saved in any way?
You know, a lot of them are still there because they just weren't removed. There were also some small components that are shown. Actually, there's a small little history exhibit in the first floor that anyone can go in. It's open to the public. And so some of those were saved for that display. You know, but a lot of that was probably the nicest one of the bunch. You know, others were not as notable as that.
Okay, next question. What was the approximate date or time frame when the limestone was replaced by the granite veneer on the first floor exterior?
That was probably in the 50s or 60s. Like I said, it kind of one, it just looks like that era. Two, it coincided with the American Airlines or the Airlines Row history. And you know, it's one of those things where you, like I said, you know, they only did as much as they had to, and sometimes you wonder when they took the granite off, would the limestone be behind there? And it wasn't. I mean, they removed all the stone, and so all of that stone had to be rebuilt to match the original at that whole corner. But yeah, I would estimate sometime in the 1960s. Would have to track down the exact date.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So it sounds as if the project utilized the federal investment tax credits. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so what were the biggest hurdles in meeting the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation?
I would say I can just go back and think about all the conversations we had with SHPO at the time. I mean, there was a lot of really tricky aspects to the project. The rooftop additions and penthouses were something that took a lot of work to kind of prove out. Likewise, the rotunda, the reconstruction of the rotunda, even though that might seem like an obvious, of course we're going to do that. It's not necessarily an easy sell because you really have to commit to rebuilding it exactly as it once was. And so, you know, just showing a lot of detail there was very important to get approved. Other items that were challenging, you know, the window replacement is always something that you have to spend time on to, again, kind of show your work and make sure that you're doing the right thing. But in all honesty, I mean, you know, they all felt like the right path. It wasn't so much of having to convince anybody. It was just a matter of really just putting in the work to kind of show what the right path was in all of those elements. So they all took a lot of work. And same goes for the cornice replacement. You know, again, that's a big step to say we're going to take down this whole cornice and rebuild it. And we had really had to show in a lot of detail what that would look like. But yeah, I mean, those were all challenging, but they were never, you know, call it at risk to the project. They were just a matter of just putting the work in and showing how to do it right.
Thank you. Next question. Could you please say again the company that did the cornice line replication in fiberglass?
Yep, the Glass Line is the company, and they are locally based. They actually got their start in automotive, like building tanks for the industrial side of things. But at some point, they decided to move into the decorative architectural fiberglass.
Hey, is the building fully tenanted?
The commercial spaces are not. There's still some vacant retail and or commercial space on the first 3 floors. But there are a lot of, I mean, at this point, I think there's 4 or 5 restaurant and bar locations in the building. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I think there's 5. So some of the retail needs to be rented out still. I know that Bedrock is working tirelessly to get it filled up as quickly as possible. The Roost hotel rooms have been very popular and generally are booked up. You know, that's a more transient lodging. As far as the residences goes, I think there are still, I mean, there's a lot of apartments here, and it really, you know, they do kind of a phased rollout of them. So, but I believe that some of the apartments are still available.
Okay. Next question. Bedrock seems to seek interesting nighttime exterior lighting scheme for their buildings. Who does their light work?
You know, it depends on the project. It's different every time. I know that in this case, Bureau Happold did they did the interior work. On the exterior, you know, we've worked with Illuminart pretty regularly before. But like when we did Shinola Hotel with them, there was a company from New York that came in and was the lighting designer for the exterior. So honestly, a lot of it is a mix of lighting designer, but also what Bedrock wants, and also what the architects want. We always have a big input on what the lighting scheme is like as well.
Okay, next question. Have the original cornices, caryatids, or other decorative elements that have been removed, replaced, been saved, or stored?
Yeah, the ones they actually had a lot. They had a whole room of them for a while, and they've put several of them on display in that kind of history storefront. And a lot of them. Part of the challenge of the removal was, how do you suspend a staging underneath that and remove pieces safely? And a lot of the pieces just came apart as they came off the building, just because they were so deteriorated. So so many of them were just fragments, but they did save some of the more interesting ones, the faces or a foot or a kneecap, those kinds of things. And they have those stashed away.
Okay, next question. Are there any tours of the building that the public can join?
The lobby is open, so anyone can go into the lobby area. And just walk around and enjoy the place. So anybody can go in. I don't know that if Bedrock offers tours or not. Probably something to look in on their website or something. I don't think they do. I mean, they are private residences, so there there is a level of security there that has to be maintained.
Okay. Next question. Could you tell us more about the unusual top of the building, why it was designed that way, and what is inside?
Well, right now it's mostly it's mostly mechanical equipment, and always was. A lot of times the tops of these buildings, the Fisher building is very similar. It has that peaked copper roof, and a lot of times what was in that space was fire suppression. The way fire suppression used to work is, nowadays you get a pump and it pumps the water up. Well, back then you had big tanks up there that were filled with water, and they just gravity fed the fire suppression system in the building. So it was a mix of, there's elevator penthouses up there. It really is very utilitarian space underneath the that mansard roof. So, and as far as like with the design, I think it just followed what Kamper was trying to do with the building. It certainly is the most striking part of the exterior. It really stands out from a long ways away.
Okay. Next question. As Chrisman or Brinker were working on the building, were there any interesting graffiti, trash, artifacts that discovered left by the original workmen?
Yeah, so Chrisman Brinker was they were a joint venture construction manager on the project. And I'll be honest, I mean, there was all sorts of small things. Nothing jumps out at me. You probably have to hear from them if they have any recollection of any kind of fantastic things. I mean, there were other sorts of strange artifacts in the building. I mean, before it was demoed, there was this infamous room on the upper floors that just stored old Christmas decorations. Kind of a frightening space. So if you just walk into it, not knowing it's there. So, there's always unique curiosities in these buildings when you walk through them. I don't recall specifically any, like newsprints or anything like that. I feel like there was this may be the building. Hopefully this is not me speaking out of turn, but I feel like this was the building where they found the woman's bag that had been stolen from her and stashed above a ceiling tile in like a bathroom or something. And I'm pretty sure it's this building, but I could be wrong. So hopefully no one takes offense. But yeah, they found it and they actually brought it back to her. She was still alive, and she was, I mean, she's very aged, but she was like, yeah, that bag was stolen, and they found it. So that was kind of an interesting story, if I recall.
Hey, thank you. Next question. Has there been any modification for code compliance to the event space?
Yeah, so I see this question. It actually does have two means of egress. There are the main doors that walk in kind of square and center in the space, but there's actually a second set of doors off to the side that you can exit to one of the other staircases in the building. I mean, egress in general in this building is an interesting one. There's actually a lot of stairs in them. But again, you've got the fire escape. I didn't have time to show it in this presentation, but there's an open stair that's really quite beautiful. The original staircase in the building that was just wide open to the corridor and 13 stories tall. And we had to do some specialty maneuvering there to make sure that it was protected so that it wasn't a smoke or fire hazard. But yeah, the event space is, it does have it was very close. It was actually one of those just fortunes where the separation of the exits was just far enough apart that it justified as two means of egress from the space.
Okay. Next question. Was the city of Detroit very supportive of this project?
Yeah, absolutely. We really did not have I mean, there's always challenges with dealing with an old building, especially one of this size. There were some zoning challenges as far as loading access and things like that. I think there had to be a variance, if I recall correctly. But the city was very supportive of the use of rehab code and the kind of reconstruction of this open atrium, the fire escape, et cetera. BC was on board all the way. I mean, there's always details that you have to figure out. One of the really challenging ones was how to sprinkler the area under the rotunda. It just, again, sometimes you have accidents happen and sometimes they're not so happy. In that case, the height of the rotunda was just over the point, or I should say just under the point where you didn't have to sprinkler it. And so sprinklering that space is just really difficult. You don't want a sprinkler head just poking right into the middle of that dome and sitting up in the middle of it. And so that required some specialty kind of fire suppression design. But this is all part of the routine for buildings like this. The more complex they are, the more, again, you just got to be open and honest with everybody and show your work, as I like to say, so that we're all on the same page and kind of make decisions together. You get consensus and you move forward.
Okay. So can outside groups arrange to rent the top floor space?
The event space, yeah. I mean, it's open for weddings. Ceremonies of any kind that you want. It's actually a really nice event space up there. There's the large open area, but then there's also some pre-function rooms that are kind of more lounge seating type space that connect to the main event space. That corridor I mentioned, that is the second egress, actually leads to a whole commercial kitchen up on the 13th floor that connects to the event space. So they have full catering services, and yeah, you can go in and book an event there. It's I think it seats maybe 100 to 150 people if you kind of banquet style.
Cool. Okay, next question. While the height and spacing of the balustrade was challenged due to modern code, the shape appears different from the period representations.
The components were, I mean, it was a series of things. So a number of the images, were renderings. But the balustrades were, I think, primarily taken from the original drawings. The Kamper drawings, there were some great sections of that. And I mean, I'm going from memory now, but I recall them looking very similar to the original shape of the balusters themselves. The main difference and why it looks so different is that they're just a lot closer. The spacing between them originally was very far apart, or at least appears to have been that case. And so that kind of changes the shape of them to just when you just see them. So that may be what you're seeing.
Okay, next question. You might have mentioned this a little bit. So was there central air conditioning installed?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, the image on screen right now, you can see the penthouse along the back there. That was built, it's actually open on top, and it was built to screen the cooling tower. So the cooling tower, it's called a water source heat pump system. And those cooling towers chill the coolant that runs through the whole building, and is each of the apartments and retail spaces have a heat pump in them that blows out heat or cool depending on what you need.
Okay, Next question. Were the Book Brothers active in the cultural scene of Detroit? For example, were they donors of the Detroit Institute of Arts or the Detroit City Opera?
That is a good question, and I am not the person to answer it. Cassandra, I don't know if you have any insight on that. I know you've done some research in them on the past.
I don't know if they donated to either of those entities. They were, I answered in the chat that the Book family was one of Detroit's most prominent in the 1920s. They were highly involved in all sorts of committees and clubs, and the newspapers carry, thousands of articles about their activities. So I can say confidently they were involved in the cultural milieu of Detroit. Whether they were major donors to those institutions, I can't really say. I do know that they donated to other things based on newspaper articles I've read. So I suppose the answer is yes, with an asterisk.
Okay, thank you. I think we will take one last question, which is, what are some of the other preservation projects that the Kraemer Design Group is working on or will be working on soon that you would like to share?
It's always hard for the are working on because there's so many, NDA non-disclosure agreements. But other projects we've worked on, I mean, we like to talk about the three Davids, the David Broderick, the David Whitney, and the David Stott buildings. You can actually see David Stott just peeking out behind the book tower. Broderick Tower was at this point now almost 15 years ago when construction started, but I think we started working on that project almost 20 years ago as well. David Whitney building was just in the news. It got a major renovation, but it's still a fantastic building. We've done a lot of work. We're architects and interior designers, but also historic consultants. And so many of the projects, especially those done by Bedrock, we've consulted on in some shape or form in addition to being designers on them. So, ones in the future, a lot of the big ones are done here in Detroit. We just recently finished up the Detroit Free Press building. We finished up the Albert Kahn building just a few years ago. So we're looking at, there's a lot of, call it mid-sized buildings that are underway, and hoping to announce those soon.
Hey, I will back out to you guys for future webinar opportunities. Thank you, Brian and Cassandra, so much for your time and this presentation. This is really great. And thank you, everybody, for attending. So this webinar is being recorded. You will receive the link to the recording in an email in the next few days. So please feel free to share with your friends and coworkers or people who might be interested. And I just want to quickly announce our next webinar. It's scheduled for April 11th at 1 o'clock, and it's going to be recognizing LGBTQ history experience from the Lake Michigan Lakeshore. And I hope to see you all next time. And thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.